So let's get going on the mathematics. At this point, I'm going to share my screen, but rather sharing the PowerPoint, I'm going to share the web browser. So I am hoping that you can now see the NRICH homepage in front of you. Charlie, would you mind nodding so that I can see that you can see the NRICH homepage? Fantastic.
Yes, I can.
Brilliant. Good to know. So the aim of this afternoon is to work together to explore the current primary feature on the NRICH site. We'll have a chance to do some of the mathematics together, and we hope that we'll have also opportunities to discuss what the tasks could look like back in your classroom and how you might encourage the learners you're working with to think in a mathematical way. As I said, this is the homepage of NRICH. Let's navigate to the primary teacher homepage where we will find a link to the current feature. So there are a couple of ways I could do this. I could, in this top green box, click the primary homepage link here. Alternatively, I could use the top menu bar along the screen here and click primary teachers. That menu bar along the top, it stays wherever you are on the NRICH site. So I think I'm going to use that way just because you'll always know you can get back to the primary teacher homepage in that way. So here we go. This is the primary teacher homepage. The top left here, you can find links to all our curriculum support materials, and we'll say a little bit more about those towards the end of the webinar this afternoon. The pink box gives you links to resources that particularly encourage mathematical thinking and developing children's habits of mind. But it's this top right box we're going to focus on today. Let's click here for the current feature. Here we go. Now, if you're not so familiar with NRICH, just to let you know, by feature, what we mean is a group of tasks, sometimes an article or one or more articles as well, all grouped around a particular theme. So if I just scroll down a little bit, you get a little bit of a feel for what's contained in this feature. Each of these blue titles is either a task or an article. In this case, the top left one, P is for posing, is an article, and all the others are tasks. Charlie, who, as I said at the beginning, is the secondary coordinator of NRICH, is going to help me kind of guide you through the feature by having a chat with me about what it contains, asking appropriate questions. We hope in that way you'll get a little bit of an insight about why we have created these tasks and how we hope you'll use them. So Charlie, I don't know whether you've got any questions before we begin or Charlie, I can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Sorry. Now, you were explaining about features. I suppose the only thing I wanted to add was we publish 6 features a year, so approximately one every 2 months. For every half term in the UK, we publish a new feature. And as Liz was saying, she's been responsible for the problems, for creating the problems in this feature. So we're going to talk about it because I've looked at them, but only in passing. I haven't been involved in creating them. So this is a genuine conversation of me trying to find out from Liz what her thinking was.
Okay, well, shall we give a general overview to start with? So as you can see, the current feature focuses on data handling this half term. What we've tried to do is to offer you some activities to use with children throughout the primary age range, right the way from reception, so 4 and 5 year olds, right up through to upper key stage 2. And we'd like to give children some opportunities to explore data that is given to them, to analyse data, to represent data, for example. However, also importantly, some of our tasks encourage children to pose the questions for themselves. That way they perhaps are more motivated to undergo the whole data handling cycle. To find out more about the sort of approach that we're advocating, please do take a look at our article, Peers Proposing, which has been written by Ems, our director, and that gives you some further information about the kind of the process that children can go through, and why encouraging them to ask their own questions can be so powerful. Charlie, have you got any particular questions about the content generally?
No, I'm just curious about what's in the problems.
Okay, great. Let's start then. So why don't we choose, as I say, we will look at tasks throughout the entire age range. So but let's start at the bottom end, Key Stage 1. This one's called Ladybird Count. Incidentally, you may notice that we do give an approximate age range as guidance for you, as a label. And this challenge level indication here will either be 1 star, 2 stars, or 3 stars. And by that, we're trying to help you decide who might be best suited to tackle this task. So we'd suggest that a 1-star task would be great for a mixed attainment whole class. Most children in that sort of context will be able to get a good way through this task, as opposed to at the other end of the scale, a 3-star task might require quite sophisticated problem solving and reasoning. So perhaps you'd offer that to children who have got a lot of experience of problem solving already, or those who need a real challenge in that respect. So, Ladybird Count. Now, I don't want you to worry, Charlie, too much about what you see on the screen yet, because just to make it a bit easier, I'm going to pull up this sheet. And I'm hoping, let's make that a little bit bigger. So, Charlie, I'm hoping that here on the screen you can see some pictures of ladybirds. These are images of cards that 5 children have collected after playing a game. And let's sort of get in the mood, get sort of into the problem. Charlie, what do you notice?
I think the first thing I notice is that the names of the children are in alphabetical order.
You're spot on. I wonder why. Yes, that might have been deliberate, actually.
I suppose the other thing I notice is there are some cards with no ladybirds, and then 1, 2, and 3 ladybirds is the maximum you can have on any card. I'm wondering how many ladybirds are all together.
Oh, okay, interesting. Just for those of you joining us at home or in school, I wanted to just make the point that although Charlie has, apart from the point about the alphabetical order, he's homed in immediately on some mathematical noticings. Now, of course, Charlie is a very sophisticated mathematician. And you will find that children in your class may well offer mathematical noticings, but they will offer so much more as well. And I think our job in the classroom is to value all their comments at this stage, allow them to get these things off their chests, even if they don't pertain to mathematics at all. It sets, it's a lovely sort of a low threshold for everyone to participate and feel that they can contribute. Sorry to interrupt you, Charlie, there. So Charlie, you've pointed out a few things that you notice. I wonder if you have any questions about what you see.
Well, I'm wondering whether if we rearrange the cards, we could do it in such a way that all the children would have the same number of ladybirds. I'm wondering whether the same number of blanks and 1s and 2s and 3s.
Okay, let me stop you there. Now over to you at home or in school. Please do suggest on the chat either some questions that genuinely occur to you at this point, or please do offer suggestions for questions that you think your children might come up with. So literally, my prompt to you is, what questions do you have? What do you wonder? And let me give you a few minutes to post on the chat. Thank you very much for your contributions. I like this one. How did Carmel get so many ladybirds? Yeah, indeed. How did she? Did Danny go to the toilet halfway through the game? Well, Tom and Claire, I wonder what prompts you to say that. Wonderful range of questions, and I particularly popped up one. Do all the children have the same number of spots? And one of them, it says, do we assume that all the ladybirds have the same number of spots? I appreciate that on your screens, the images that I can see might be relatively small. This, you can, for the purposes of use in the classroom, you can print off this sheet and you could cut up either the sheet into the individual children's groups or even into individual cards, and of course then it's much easier to see that yes, the ladybirds are all identical. Charlie, is there anything that's come up on the chat that you'd like to draw attention to?
Well, somebody mentioned that not all the ladybirds were facing in the same direction, which I hadn't noticed before. So the cards with 3 ladybirds aren't identical cards.
No, this is a good point. Yeah.
I keep wondering if these cards came from a pack of cards, can I predict how many cards haven't been dealt yet or something? I'm imagining a game being played and this being a subset of the whole set of cards, and how many there might be. Sorry, I'm wittering. I'll shut up.
No, absolutely. Well, I think what is fascinating is how such a simple starting point can produce such a variety of questions. Now, by its very nature, I guess a rich task often does offer opportunities for taking it in many different directions, and you as the class teacher will have some really good ideas to begin with before you use the task about what you'd like to get out of it. I guess I would encourage you to keep that goal in mind, but allow for some muddling so that everybody's questions are acknowledged and valued. But then you will want to go in a particular direction. Now, this particular feature, as I've already said, is about data handling. So the question actually on the NRICH site, let me go back to that. If I go back in my browser, we're going to get to ladybird count on the site. The question on the NRICH site focuses very much on thinking about the number of ladybirds that each child has, and challenging children to create a picture or a graph or some sort of chart to show that. However, this, as I say, this is just one option. You have proven in your comments on the chat that you could go all sorts of ways. Charlie, is there a particular question that you think could be worth picking up to unpick further that you've noticed?
Oh, sorry, I was concentrating on the questions that I had.
Charlie, that's not very, very community-minded of you. Which was your?
No, but it's in the spirit of you giving us something to think about. And
look, this is true. I'm glad that you've been motivated to pursue a line of inquiry, Charlie.
I think there are 5 children, and the total number of ladybirds isn't a multiple of 5. So I don't think they can be shared out equally. But I'm wondering whether they can be shared in such a way that one person has one more than the other person, and they go up in ascending order or something. Or can 4 people have? I don't know. Can 4 people have the same number of ladybirds and one person not? Or I wonder, could 3 children have the same number and 2 children? You know, it's sort of like poker, full house, or a run. This is those kind, because you were talking about data handling, different ways of arranging things that might make sort of sense in terms of being able to say, yes, each one goes up by 1 or by 2. Yes.
Yeah. Or if you did want each child to have the same number, I guess could we create some more cards so that after another dealing or another round of the game, everybody does have, what cards would we need to create? Perhaps something like that. If that, yeah. Okay, great. Let me just scroll down when you're on. So just to flag up, Claire and Ems have been pointing this out. If I go back to the site on NRICH, you can see on the top left here, we always have teachers' resources with our tasks. So if I click here, just to give you an overview very quickly, they have the same headings. We always focus on why do this problem. So what is the mathematics that this problem could be used to draw out and to focus on? A possible approach, how you could present it in the classroom, some key questions, some extension and support ideas. So do have a look at those, and you'll also find links to downloadable and printable sheets in the teacher's notes, as well as on the problem page itself where appropriate. Something else that we could just flag up while we're here, you can see also on this left-hand menu that there is a submit a solution link. That is because there are no solutions to this particular activity as yet. It's what we call a live problem, a live task. If I click here, you get the option to send us a solution. Now, you as the teacher could send us a summary of what some children in your class have been up to, or you can encourage the children to do that directly themselves, whichever works best for you. You can upload photos, you can send links to shared documents, to public videos. And what we do is we look through all those solutions that come in. And when it comes to publishing our new feature just before the Easter holiday, we will also publish a range of children's solutions to these tasks that are now live. Just to let you know, you've got until the end of March the 15th to submit solutions to us. And most of the activities in this current feature are live. So you can get your teeth into them with your students after today. Charlie, is there anything else about ladybirds that you'd like to flag up or ask at this point?
No, people have been talking about make this be part of a game, and I can imagine games being a wonderful way of getting children counting and noticing and grouping things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay then, so that's the first task that's suitable for relatively young children, but of course could be used with older too. Let's go back to the primary teacher homepage and to the current feature. What I'd like to do now is to show you a couple of tasks, but relatively quickly, but particularly because I'd like to draw your attention to the interactivities that are newly created. So let's look at this one first. The titles are very straightforward. I'm sure you can predict what we might be faced with here. So here is an example of a Carroll diagram. Now, if your children are already familiar with Carroll diagrams, this could be a great way to refresh their minds and deepen their understanding. Or you could use it to introduce Carroll diagrams. We've included these questions again, which we used for the ladybird count. What do you notice? What do you wonder? They are so powerful for engaging children at the start of a task. So if I was having a look at this, I just want to demonstrate this interactivity allows you to drag the numbers onto the Carroll diagram, into the correct place. So let's think, Charlie, okay, talk me through where you'd place the number 18.
18 is not less than 10.
Uh-huh.
And it's not odd. So bottom right-hand corner.
Brilliant. Okay. Now, this interactivity doesn't give you any feedback. So it's not going to tell you if you're correct or if you're incorrect. However, the reason for drawing it to your attention is that I think it could be very powerful as a tool in the classroom. If you click on the purple cog, which is the settings menu here, it allows you to edit and to create your own Carroll diagram. So for example, I'm going to remove these two labels. I'm going to keep the numbers 1 to 20. If I just scroll right, you can see that simply there we've got listed consecutive numbers from 1 to 20. I'm going to click here where it says the settings will take place in the current window. So what I've done now is I've just removed the headings for the two columns. So Charlie, here's a challenge. Those of you participating, do post in the chat. I have got in mind headings for my columns. I'd like you to try and work out what the headings are by testing a number, by asking me to place one of the numbers and see how few numbers you could place before you're certain. I guess, you see, if Charlie was less trusting of me, he might insist that I write down my rule, because I could change my mind partway through, but I won't do that. Okay, Charlie?
Okay, where would you put 6?
Okay, I'm going to put 6 here.
You could always write something on a bit of paper and then show it to us later to convince us that you didn't change your mind.
Would you like me to do that, Charlie?
I trust you.
Okay, so that's where 6 goes.
Okay, what about 9?
9, okay, so 9 goes in the same cell as 6.
And 12?
Mm-hmm.
And at what stage do you want me to say, oh, I think I know what?
You can do that at any stage you like,
Well,
go on.
Well, if I'd been in your position, I would have been very tempted to be thinking about multiples of 3 and not multiples of 3.
Okay.
But I think we had odds and evens before. So the next in kind of difficulty. So I'm tempted to think that you've gone for multiples of 3 on the right-hand column.
Is that your final answer?
I feel like I should phone a friend and ask them to tell me on the chat whether they think I'm right. Go on then, it's my final answer.
Well, in fact, I can see how from the numbers you've got there, how you've come to that conclusion. That wasn't, in fact, that wasn't the heading I had in mind.
Okay, so can I try another number?
Yeah, please do. People on the chat, other people were with you, Charlie, on the chat. Multiples of 3. Prime, non-prime is another suggestion. It could also have been that, Darren.
Okay.
But it's not that.
Oh, I was going to say, well, let's try that. Where would you put 3?
Okay.
Okay, so maybe, goodness.
Would you like me to choose a number to place? Oh, Jennifer suggests 2-digit and 1-digit. I'm not sure that the 2-digit and 1-digit would work quite, because in this column we've got both numbers with 2 digits and with 1 digit. Where would 5 go? Jude asks. Okay, Jude, I shall show you where 5 goes. Here. Factors of 36, factors of 24. I can completely see. I'm going to give you one more example, I think. Ooh.
Okay, so on the left, multiples of 5, and on the right, not multiples of 5?
Yes, and Jude got there just before you, Charlie. Not that timing and speed is important in this context, but yes. So there we go. I'd just like to demonstrate how you could use that interactivity. Despite the fact you don't get feedback, you could still use it, I think, as quite a helpful tool in the classroom. And although when I clicked on the settings, I simply took the labels off, you could choose to write your own labels and create a different Carroll diagram. Thank you, Ems. Yes, I agree. Everybody showed some great mathematical thinking.
I hope she's also referring to my mathematical thinking there, Liz.
Brownie points with the boss, Charlie. So that's really why I wanted to share that particular task. Again, as we said before, there are teachers' resources associated with the task. And in this particular problem, we've also included just print-offable, I don't know if that's a word. Anyway, sheets that can be printed off if you would prefer to work away from the computer.
Printable.
Printable, thank you, that's better. Charlie, any questions in particular about that Carroll diagrams, that whistle-stop tour?
Well, I could imagine students doing this, working in pairs,
yeah,
and working just like you and I have worked, where one student thinks of, and they might even sometimes think of both the column and the row headings. So have everything blank, and you've got to figure out. And I think perhaps I wouldn't trust them quite as much as I trusted you.
No.
And you know, they could write in advance what their headings are going to be.
Yeah.
And perhaps every time you have a guess and it's wrong, you know, you get 2 penalty points.
Yeah.
Something like that. I could imagine this being, I mean, you'd have to have some rules about the kind of rules that were allowed and weren't allowed. But yeah, no, that'd be great.
Yeah. Yes, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Janie, or possibly Yanni, is suggesting that you could have one pair creating for another pair as well, do pair on pair, absolutely. Yeah, great idea. But yeah, thank you.
Especially because then there's less chance of making mistake. It would be really irritating playing this and then finding that somebody made a mistake along the way and you're trying to figure something out, and it would have been, so pairs of students working together.
Yeah.
And it then means that they talk to each other.
Yes. The other thing that was interesting, actually, from my point of view, was trying to consider whether there would be some numbers that would help you, given your initial thoughts. So I was trying to think, what numbers could I place that might provoke your thinking a little bit? So that was interesting from my point of view as well, rather than just literally sort of saying yes or no. It gave me something to think about, which was potentially quite challenging, I guess. So, okay, brilliant. Thanks, Charlie. Thank you all for your contributions. Just one thing that is useful to bear in mind for that particular interactivity, it doesn't easily, hang on, if I just go back to it, just so you can see what I mean. At the bottom here, you can fit 30 numbers quite comfortably here, but beyond that, it's not so clear. So just to warn you, you don't, of course, have to have consecutive numbers, but if you try to use more than 30 numbers, it becomes too jumbled. So just to flag that up. Right then, so having met that Carroll diagrams task, in a similar vein, I'd like to share with you, I bet, Charlie, you'll never guess what this one is. This interactivity, you will recognise the layout and the kind of the format, but here we have now an interactive Venn diagram. Similarly, you could use this to introduce the idea of Venn diagrams or to sort of remind your children about them. In a similar way, you can use the cog at the top here, and you can type in labels and enter the numbers that you'd like children to work with. And as we've just said, of course, children can do that to themselves. If I scroll down, we've offered a couple of different interactivities for children to work on, but then in a sort of a similar way that we just had a go at with the Carroll diagram task, we've got a screenshot here of a Venn diagram which has lost its labels, and the challenge would be for the children to find the labels. So very similar sort of sequence of questioning. You could use a similar sort of pedagogical setup if you like, but just with a slightly different mathematical focus. Charlie, is there anything that you can think of that you'd like to point out or ask about that?
I was trying to work out whether I find this easier than the Carroll diagrams.
Okay, yeah, good. We'll have a little look. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, this one, sorry, the problem itself here, because I've got so many numbers, I think is reasonably straightforward. The group on the left seems to have odd numbers, and the group on the right seems to be numbers that are bigger than 20. But no, I just meant conceptually for children,
yes,
whether Venn diagrams are easier than Carroll diagrams,
okay,
or do they get introduced at the same time to primary children?
No, they don't actually. Well, interesting. It's a really good question, actually, Charlie. So interestingly, Carroll diagrams are routinely introduced when children are much younger than a Carroll diagram. And in fact, Venn diagrams are not specified on the Key Stage 2 mathematics curriculum, but at the same time, they do often, feature in, for example, SATs questions, and are such a useful way of presenting data that it's generally advised that you do introduce them in Key Stage 2, even though they're not specified. I see there. Did somebody say, oh, Yeni, you said that the Venn is introduced in the US earlier than a Carroll diagram? That's interesting. And yes, they obviously have overlap with science as well. But I think your point, Charlie, is an interesting one about how if we populate the Venn diagram or equally the Carroll diagram completely with numbers, that presumably makes finding the headings easier than adding numbers in turn. So you could, one way of differentiating potentially. Shall we move on?
Yes.
Okay.
But presumably you do the same kind of activity here that we were talking about doing with the Carroll diagrams. And again, you could get students in pairs and so on.
Absolutely. Exactly. Same kind of setup, just with a different mathematics. Yeah. So let's go back to the primary teacher feature. Now, this next task handily combines both Carroll and Venn diagrams, Charlie. First of all, before we look too closely, I'd like you, Charlie, what do you notice about my 4 shapes?
Okay, they all have straight edges. They there are 2 triangles and 2 quadrilaterals.
Mm-hmm.
D looks like it's an equilateral triangle and C looks like it's a square. So there are 2 regular polygons and 2 which are not regular.
Okay, brilliant. I'll stop you there. Again, you have you've come in straight away with your very mathematical noticings, which children might not do, but thank you. So
they're labeled in alphabetical order.
Very good. So the second question, those of you working at home or school, this one's for you as well. Can you think of some ways in which you could sort these 4 shapes? I'm not going to say anything other than that, but how could you sort them? Do post some ideas on the chat. Thank you. There are comments about numbers of sides, comments about angles, comments about regularity, irregularity. Somebody commented it's flown up my chat screen. It just shows how super productive you are at contributing, about pointy and non-pointy. And again, I think it's really important to acknowledge that not mathematical language but encouraging children to use even everyday words to describe shapes is a fantastic starting point for along their sort of geometrical journey. So yes, absolutely. And symmetry, many of you have pointed out as well. Okay, so that we could sort them in all sorts of different ways. Charlie, I'd like to share with you I'm going to put up on the screen. I know you're not going to be able to take in all that I'm scrolling past, but I'm going to put up a sheet for you. I've managed to draw on my screen. How have I managed to do that? I hope that's not in the way, is it? Sorry, please try to ignore that. I've got a yellow line down my screen.
It's from the days that you were blonde.
Thanks, Charlie. So Kirsten has taken these 4 shapes and she's sorted them in 3 different ways. And for each way of sorting, she has created a Carroll diagram, and she's also created a Venn diagram to show the same way of sorting.
Liz?
Yeah.
What would happen if you went to 120%?
Yeah. Oh, there we go, 125. Oh, yes, I can still get them on.
Yeah, I think, yes, that's slightly clearer.
Thank you. So she's sorted in these 3 ways. She's created a Carroll diagram and a Venn diagram for each way. She has forgotten to put the labels on the Venn diagrams though. So the challenge for us is to match up the Carroll diagram with its Venn diagram partner. So those 2 diagrams that show the same way of sorting. Now, I'd love you to have a go at this task, those of you at home or school. Claire has very kindly posted on the chat, thank you Claire, the direct link. You may find it much easier to look at that at the sheet on your device now rather than looking at my shared screen, because it's probably quite small for you. Have a little look and have a go. Could you match to create 3 pairs? Now, what I'd love you to do if possible is post in the chat your thinking. What are you thinking about? What are you attending to in order to find solutions for this task? Try not to give anything away if you can. So don't give me an answer, but could you share what you're thinking about? How are you approaching the task? Okay, Charlie, anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm trying to work out the answers myself.
Okay, no spoilers, no spoilers. All right, off you go, have a go. Please try to resist giving us answers at this stage. Thank you, those of you who are commenting. Yeah, what's the same? What's different? Thank you, Gilly. What characteristics do they have in common? What makes them similar? Thank you, Denise. Ruby's talking about matching the pairs of shapes. I'll just give you a few more moments to have a look at the task. Nice. Why is that shape not included in the diagram? Yes, what makes it different? Thank you. Sorry, I don't know your name. G Conway. Georgina, thanks, Georgina. Okay, this is great. Thank you. I think encouraging children to be able to articulate reasoning in this kind of way without necessarily giving an answer is a really useful tool in the classroom. It's a kind of, I sort of see it as a mini plenary opportunity. I have rushed you totally, for which I apologise. I know you won't have got all the way through the task, and some of you will be annoyed with me for talking. But if you give children a little bit of time to begin to think about the task, for example, in pairs, and then bring them together to share the kind of things they are thinking about, not answers, it can really help to bring the community together so that you can begin to share suggestions. Those children who feel that they haven't made any progress will be able to listen out for ideas, hints and tips. Thank you. Yes, it is hard, isn't it? Yeah. Let me give you a little bit more time, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion. Shall we actually look at a solution, at some solutions, Charlie, perhaps? How are you feeling, Charlie, about this?
Well, the other thing that occurred to me is here's a really good example of when you don't need, it's not helpful to necessarily think you've got to do them in a particular order.
No.
So I found the Carroll 3 diagram, because of the way that the shapes were bunched, the one that was easiest to link up to one of the Venn diagrams. So
there's a top tip from Charlie then, everybody. Thank you, Charlie. Elizabeth agrees with you, Charlie. Great. Yeah, absolutely. I guess that, you know, perhaps for as long as we have to present things in a sort of an order down a page, that's going to be a difficulty, isn't it? But I guess in a classroom, if you printed out the sheet and cut them into their 6 separate diagrams, then children could move them around and sort them physically, which might break down that barrier a bit. Okay, let's give you all just another minute or so to think about the 3 pairs. And at this point, perhaps you could post solutions and your reasoning. And if there are those of you who don't want to know answers, try and not read the chat for the next couple of minutes, I would suggest. Okay, I'm going to, given the time, I'm going to draw you together again. I like the fact that somebody posted about how they thought their way wasn't particularly clever. That's, I think we shouldn't be so deprecating. The word clever is an interesting one, isn't it? It has connotations, I think, of being magically good at something rather than putting in effort or work. That's kind of how I read it. Maybe I read in too much to a word. So I would encourage the person who was, who felt that their way wasn't clever, was that, what we're looking for here is reasoning. How did you go about it? If your reasoning is clear and you followed a logical process, then your way is just as valuable as somebody else's way. As we become perhaps more sophisticated mathematicians, we might find that for some things there are efficient methods and less efficient methods, but even then it might be that they differ according to the individual. So please don't put yourself down in that way, would be mine. Shall we have a quick look at, should we look at maybe one pairing? So I noticed that several of you have posted that you think Carroll diagram 1 goes with Venn diagram 1. Now remember that what's made this quite challenging is the fact that there are no labels. So if that is the case, not only are we going to talk through why we think that, but actually, what does that mean that the labels are for Venn diagram 1? So, Charlie, do you have any thoughts about, well, Charlie, am I being unfair? Because you pointed out actually that a different one would be a better way.
No. I'm happy to talk about Carroll 1 and Venn diagram 1 because partly because it wasn't the easiest one, but I see that in the circle in the left, the set on the left, there are 2 triangles.
Yes.
And in Carroll diagram 1, the left-hand corner has got 2 triangles. So that tells me that I can label the set on the left triangles.
Okay, so the left-hand set, the left-hand circle on the Venn diagram would be labelled as triangles. I think, that makes sense so far, Charlie, yeah.
And then I can see that the set on the right contains the right-angled triangle and the rectangle, and that coincides with the bottom row of the Carroll diagram. So I'm thinking that the set on the right must be the irregular shapes. And that makes sense because the overlap between the column on the left, triangles, and the bottom row, irregular, has shape A, and that is why it appears in both. And then just to check, I want to make sure that shape C is neither a triangle nor irregular. So if it is a square, then it's regular and not a triangle, and that is why it doesn't appear in any of the sets. So I had to do quite a lot of thinking to both sort of pair off and then confirm and work out what the labels were. But this is, what's been fantastic is seeing how we started with ladybirds and how we started with something fairly straightforward, and then we worked on to the Carroll diagram problem and the Venn diagram problem. And now towards the end of Key Stage 2, perhaps, we're being made to think quite hard here about this. So that's this is not for the faint-hearted.
That's Charlie. I like Yoni has put productive struggle. Yes, exactly, Yoni. Yeah, that idea of there was a guy called James Nottingham who wrote about the pit of confusion, and that idea that we don't want to be totally path smoothing teachers. We don't want to sort of scaffold in such a way that children will always straight away know a solution or know an answer and know exactly what to do. We'd like to give them chances to be stuck, but I guess our role is then to offer prompts or offer questions or resources that help them climb out of the pit. So being stuck is an experience that we want children to experience as they work on their mathematics. Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Given the time, we've only got a few minutes of our event left. So let's go back to the, I'm going to just make this a bit smaller. That's better. Let's go back to the feature. So that one was called Data Duos. Again, remember, if you have a go at that with your class or some of the children in your class, do send in their solutions. We're looking out for that really watertight reasoning, how they were able to match up the Carroll diagrams and the Venn diagrams. I'm afraid we haven't got time to go into any other tasks in detail, but I did want to just point out this one to you, our healthy snack shop task. This gives you a context in which you could offer children an opportunity to go through the entire data handling cycle for themselves. Here we are suggesting that children have an opportunity to set up a healthy snack shop in their class. We then ask them what information they would need in order for that to be successful. So they're thinking about the kinds of things that I guess they might need to know, which snacks people will buy. They might need to know how much they would charge for snacks. And then we're encouraging children to think about the questions they could ask in order to find out that information, and to actually collect data so that they could answer their own question in that whole data handling cycle. Again, linked to the article, so do have a look at the article. This might be a task that foreseeably you could do when we're actually back in the classroom here in England, at least those of you who are teaching in England. And again, we've written teacher resources to accompany that. Charlie, is there anything else that you think I have missed, or that I ought to say about the feature in general?
Nothing that I can think of.
Okay, thank you. In which case, just before we finish up today, I'd just like to take you back again to the primary teacher homepage and just remind you of this top left purple box that we talked about at the start. So here you will find, if you click on curriculum support, you'll find our primary curriculum page. So here this is the best place to find resources, particularly from a curriculum perspective. I'm just going to go back to the primary teacher homepage. This primary curriculum mapping is a document that you really should look at if you don't know about it already. If you click here, you get to a Google Sheet, which will give you NRICH tasks linked in with each curriculum objective from the maths curriculum in England. And this is work in progress. So we are constantly trying to add more tasks in to refine the tasks that are there. So do keep checking it, and I would suggest that it's advisable to access it live from the site so that you know you're looking at the most recent version. What I'm going to do now.
I presume that one or two problems from the current feature might end up in the mapping document.
They are already on the mapping document, actually, Charlie, yes. And you can tell that because when you click on now, that's a good question. I think it's a good test for me. Yes, this orange blob, this orange lozenge on the side tells you that it's in the curriculum mapping document already. Yeah, good point. Thank you. Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing my web browser, and instead I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint very briefly, just to finish up this afternoon. So I'm hoping you can see this. The fact that you were all here present today means you must have found out about the event somehow, but these are the ways to keep in touch with us. If you use Twitter, please do follow us using the @NRICHMaths handle. If you'd like to carry on the conversation from this afternoon, do feel free to use that hashtag. Alternatively, or in addition, you could sign up for our email newsletter, and the link is there. There's a reminder of the URL of the primary curriculum page, which I just showed you. And that is the link where you will find a recording of this webinar in a few days' time. It probably won't go up immediately, but you will get an email through Eventbrite to alert you when it is live on the site. Finally, I mentioned at the beginning that this webinar has been made possible due to funding given to us by Trinity College in Cambridge. And to that end as well, we hope to run similar events in the future. So please do give us your feedback. Let us know what's worked well and what you'd like us to do differently and better next time. I think Claire has been super efficient and has already posted a link to the feedback form in the chat. Thank you very much, Claire. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the afternoon. Charlie, Claire, Ems, if at this stage I've missed off anything, please do jump in.
Okay, somebody's asked whether we make all the recordings of our webinars available, and we have been making them available. And now that this will be, is this our third primary one? Second primary one? Third primary one? We're going to start.
Third or fourth, I think, yes.
Okay. So there's going to be a page where we're going to be putting them all, and we're going to be doing one for every feature. So look out for something that we'll do after the Easter break.
Yes. Absolutely, yeah, thanks, Charlie. Oh, and that reminds me actually that if you would like to save a copy of the chat before you leave the webinar now, before you leave the event, do that now before it disappears and you don't have access to it anymore. If you just click on the little dots at the bottom, you get the option to save the chat should you wish. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the afternoon. Thank you so much for your participation. It makes our lives so much easier when you post enthusiastically and take time to give us thoughtful comments as we work on the maths together. And we hope to see you again at a future event. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.